Hi, I'm Cheryl Kagan, very proud to be the senator for Gaithersburg and Rockville. Welcoming to Kibbitzing with Kagan. And with me today is an old friend, and I'm just thrilled to be chatting with delegate, doctor, author, community leader, Delegate Dan Morhaim, former Delegate Dan Morhaim. We came in together in 1995, the class of 94, and he's just been a leader and done extraordinary thing. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, Dan, for joining me this evening.
I'm so happy to be with you, Cheryl. And thank you for all the great job and great service you're doing to your community and our entire state.
I really appreciate that. So I have more notes for our conversation than I think I've ever had in any of my kibitzes. So I'm just going to get started. So first, you have had an extraordinary career. Congratulations. So you have been an ER doctor. You have been a doctor to the Orioles. You've worked with fire personnel. You've been an assistant professor and a member of the House of Delegates for 25 years and an author. Tell me which aspects you've enjoyed the most and how you see them weaving together.
I've enjoyed them all. They're all different. I've been fortunate to have such a diverse range of activities and meeting so many different kinds of people, but they were all really an extension of the same thing, which is trying to make our society a little bit better. Much of it really came from my career, 40 plus years as an ER doctor. And I've worked in big suburban hospitals, 25 years in a trauma center in the middle of Baltimore City, but also volunteered at the homeless clinic for 3 years, worked on Navajo Indian reservation overseas. And when you see the things that people arrive in the emergency room with, and I'm talking about a lot of day shifts, night shifts, weekends, and holidays, and I would think to myself, a lot of what I'm dealing with could have and should have been taken care of earlier in the chain of events. I'm seeing at the end of a sequence of things, and had we taken steps earlier, so much of this could have been avoided, and that moved me towards public policy. It's not like I started out wanting to be a state legislator, but I ended up doing that.
Right. And you were very effective at it. Tell me a couple of the bills that you passed that you're especially proud of.
There are quite a few. One is in the environment area. I really started the whole state electronic recycling program. That's all over the state. That was my legislation. And as you know, it began with a task force that became a pilot program. It then became the robust program that it is now, and has kept millions of tons of toxic chemicals out of the landfill and out of our bodies and out of the environment. The very first bill I got passed was a peculiar one. It expanded, it had to do with organic food, the wine industry, and farmers markets. And at that time, 1996, they were really, organic food wasn't much. Farmers markets really didn't exist. And we only had 3 wineries in Maryland. That was a bit, it's not like it took an impact the next week or the next year, but over time, we've moved to over 90 wineries in Maryland. Farmers markets are everywhere. So, you know, that kind of thing, looking down the long term. Medical cannabis, I was certainly a major driving force for that. End of life care issues, and a lot of healthcare, obviously, as an ER doctor. And also I became sort of a legislative expert on procurement reform, which is how government buys stuff. And I chaired the subcommittee and did a lot of legislation that went unheralded because it's such a tedious, bureaucratic, yawner of a subject, but billions and billions of dollars. And if you save 1%, you save a lot of money. And I was able to make a lot of reforms.
I'm kind of a policy geek, and I actually find procurement a little bit fascinating. I had a bill this year on procurement reform for 911. And so it's the process as well as the outcome. And then there are issues around supporting minority, veteran-owned, women-owned businesses, and whether we can help Maryland customers, Maryland businesses. And then there's the whole question of oversight, like this, the deal in Korea that the governor came back with, and it turns out to have just been a waste of a lot of taxpayer money.
Yeah, and as an ER doctor and a fire surgeon in Baltimore County, let me thank you for all the 911 upgrades you've done, way ahead of the curve. You know, those are things that translated into real person's lives. They're not just abstract policy things. There's people being picked up by an ambulance who are doing better because of the work that you did, and hopefully some of the work that I did too.
There you go. There you go. Well, let's see, before we leave your legislative career, Talk to me about being a doctor in the House. Did legislators defer to your healthcare expertise, or were you sort of one of the gang and a legislator? How often did your expertise come in handy?
What they came to me for my expertise was not nearly as much as I would have liked. I'll put it that way. They
Okay.
really, you can't overplay what you are, because somebody else might be a real estate agent and they need me for real estate, and they can't, be too ponderous about that either. So I kind of overdid a little bit at the beginning of my career, and then I tried to back off, but it's hard not
Hmm.
to. On the other hand, there were people who would just never listen to me about policy stuff, but then they come up to me privately and
What's
say,
this
"Oh,
thing?
yeah, or my family member has this. What would you?" Suddenly, then they want my opinion on anything, and I would say,
Sure.
"Well, since you respect my opinion on that, how about on House Bill 123 that you've been
That's
voting, that I want to
sure.
vote for?" So it's a challenge, but it's great to have a citizen legislature,
Yes.
people with all kinds of backgrounds, and you go back the other 8, 9 months of the year, and you're a civilian and you're working. And for me, with the 24 years in office, the cycle of being in Annapolis for 3 months and then returning to the real world, and then coming back to Annapolis with a whole set of real world experiences. Life in the emergency room really helps anyone who's in that environment keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening, because
Sure.
it's so immediate. When bad heroin hits the street, we know it first. When there's an
Yeah.
outbreak of an infectious disease, we see it first. When there's a social dynamic taking place, it's played out there before it hits the newspapers or anything.
Hmm. So, as I mentioned earlier, we were both elected in 94 and came in January 95. And you stayed in for 24 years, which I think is so impressive. As you know, I served 8 years and then I got out. I was out for 12 years. I call it my 12-year gap year. And now I'm back in the Senate. But I do think reconnecting with community and being engaged is helpful, whether that's in between service or within a year, after adjournment. So,
Yeah, I also felt like 24 years was enough. I mean, it wasn't a question of getting reelected. It was
right.
just ready to should have, for me, a beginning, a middle, and an end of public service. And I'm still doing other things. Our county executive appointed me to our Behavioral Health Care Council, which I chair, appointed me to a Procurement Reform Commission.
Good.
So I do other things still, many other things,
Absolutely.
actually.
So one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk to you was about the books that you've written. So I watched you're a wonderful interview, by the way, I mean, here as well, but I've watched some others. And you wrote a book called The Better End, and then Preparing for a Better End, which is your new book. And folks can go to www.thebetterend.com, and we will put that up again at the end. Talk to me about why you decided to write the book along with your beautiful wife, Shelley.
I do have a beautiful wife, Shelley, and we have been married 45 years, which is pretty darn good, and still
Mazel tov.
very good
That's
friends. So it's a very good relationship that we have. Very
wonderful.
fortunate in that regard. Both these books are about advanced care planning and end of life care. And that is not an easy topic. It's a topic that their avoidance is the main thing. And believe me, it wasn't easy going out in campaign time and people ask me, "What are you working on, Delegate Morhaim?" And I'd run down the issues. Of course, your death, the death of everybody you know, and don't forget to vote for me in the election. But what really came from, again, was right out of my ER experience. I saw too many times, and I participated too many times in medical procedures that I knew were futile, because that was the system I was in. And it really troubled me. And I was the one doing these procedures that were very intense, and it didn't feel right. And I began to really question what was going on here. And what it boiled down to was, if I had known what the patient's wishes were, I would honor them. The patient should determine their own outcomes and determination as much as possible. My job as a clinician is to give them all the options as best I can. Sometimes patients generally choose what I would choose or what I think they should choose, but other times they don't, and that's their prerogative.
Right.
So I looked at the issue of advanced directives. Free legal forms have been around a long time, but
Mm-hmm.
very few Americans and very few Marylanders have completed them. In fact,
Roughly what percentage? Do you know?
I know exactly, because I did the study through Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, where I was on the faculty. It was a formal study with all the graphs and
Right.
t-tests and statistical analysis, but basically about 40% of us have completed advanced directives.
Mm.
Not even over 50% in the older population over 65 years old. And we also formally identified it as a minority health disparity, communities of
Sure.
color,
Mhm,
20% and less. So here's
mhm,
free tools, been around since 1991, legal,
mhm.
readily available, that we, even though our culture says it values individual autonomy and respect, we've collectively abdicated on completing free paperwork that would guide clinicians
Yes.
to do what the patient wants. And in the absence of that, all kinds of things happen. Family chaos ensues. I've seen this play out. All kinds of procedure, medical things happen, non-medical things, spiritual dynamics get disrupted, all kinds of
Yes.
stuff happens, all for lack of completing free paperwork. So that made no sense to me. So I got on the crusade to do this and wrote the first book in 2010, endorsed by Maya Angelou and others, and then
Yes.
a follow-up just now.
Well, I really want to thank you because I don't understand the fear. It's not that if we don't talk about it or don't think about it or don't plan on it, then we somehow will duck death. I always say that we're all going to die. I hate to tell you, we are all going to die. The question is when, how, whether we're going to be in pain, and whether we're ready for it. And I just believe in, I find it fascinating to talk about and vitally important. So thank you for that. I also think
Well, sorry.
no, one more thing. I think about it being pro-choice. So pro-choice at the beginning of life, whether and when to have a family, and pro-choice, it's the same issue. It's my body, and I want to decide how and when and whether I'm going to be in pain. What extraordinary measures that should be used to keep me alive.
You're exactly right. And actually, we're empowered now as the first generation in human history that likely, not guaranteed, but likely has some say about how we die. And when I do presentations to audience and to those who are listening, I would ask you this question, and it comes right off of what you said. When the end of life comes, where would you like to be? Who's around you? And what's going on? And think about that for a few seconds. And almost everybody says the same thing. At home, with my family and friends around me, pain free. The things we fear are isolation, dependence, and pain. And all those can be managed with
Mhm.
tools like hospice care, palliative care, the pain medicines, and all sorts of other things that are available now that weren't available even 25 and 50 years ago. So that end will come. Now, if I get in a car accident, please take me to the trauma center. If I get chest pain during this phone call, please call 911. But I don't want to end up in an intensive care unit long past any hope of recovery of some advanced illness with tied to tubes and monitors with my family down the hall
Mhm.
when there's no benefit to that. But that happens a lot.
Yes.
And if that's your choice, that can be your choice. It's not my choice. It's not most people's choice.
Mhm.
And so we do need to pay. Getting back to mortality, there is a line on that, which is despite all the great advances in healthcare, the death rate in the United States is, and in every country in the world is the same, one per person. And
Right.
we can act on it. We're empowered in a new and creative way. Let's take advantage of that.
Yes. So early on in the conversation around death was Dr. Kevorkian, and he was made out to be a bad guy rather than maybe rough around the edges, but kind of, in my view, a hero. Um, Laws have now changed in various states around the country, and it's now renamed to compassionate choice or death with dignity. Talk about the movement and the legislation, if you would.
I write about that in the book, along with a lot of other topics. In the book, Preparing for a Better End really goes into practical guideline steps, not these are the kinds of things that can happen, and here's some of the things you could do about how you might want to approach them.
Mhm.
People, I never got to vote on that bill. It was in the General Assembly when I was there. I listened to the testimony. I would have voted for it had that opportunity had come up.
Mhm.
But really, if we became normative in advanced directive completion, as in 98% of Americans would do this, many of the issues that people were worried about would go away. But there's always going to be a few outlier cases, like Brittany Maynard, the young woman who had terrible brain cancer at age 26 or 27 and moved to Oregon. There's no way
Oregon.
and,
Mhm.
and, and, and took advantage of death with dignity. There's always
Mhm.
going to be, and for those kinds of cases, it ought to be reserved. But most of the things that I heard people talk about that they were worried about could be managed if they completed advanced directives and thought about those issues. So but it's not a glamorous issue. It's not a cocktail party, fire starter conversation.
Mhm.
Let's talk about paperwork that you have to fill out is not exactly But that's what we do. We need to do that, just like we renew our driver's licenses, our car registration, or pay our taxes. So that's how I see it. And I think well-constructed bills like we had in Maryland, and not like the ones in other states, are worthy of passing.
Talk about the 5 wishes, if you would.
There are many versions of advanced directive forms, and 5 wishes is one of them. It's excellent. They're all good. I happen to like one called mydirectives.com. It's free. It's online. The state attorney general has them. ARP has them. And you can actually free text a lot of stuff in the context of an advanced directive. So it's not really the form itself. It's that you complete it.
Yes.
And if you go through the basic steps, part 1 is what kind of care do you want if you can't make decisions for yourself? If you aren't communicating and awake and alert, the advanced directive is not operative. Number 2 is who do you want to make decisions for you if you can't? Typically, it's going to be a spouse or trusted loved one, sibling, parent, adult child. By the way, you can also, I don't know if anybody out there has an annoying family member. You can runs their mouth at every event and takes over all conversations. You can do not let cousin Fred in the room when you're discussing my health issues, And the last part has to do with body disposition.
Yep.
Includes burials, and Shelley and I are involved in promoting, and there's one coming, I think, in Montgomery County, natural burial cemeteries, less costly, environmentally sound. Cremation.
I just started hearing about that.
Yeah, we've been into that for a while. It's happening bit by bit, but it's an amazing way to preserve land without developing it. And it's a more restful kind of environment. It looks like a forest. It looks like meadows. It does not look like that manicured lawn with a lot of monuments.
Right.
Now, for those who want that, that's fine. But the
Right.
big monuments have always troubled me because it felt like you're pouring a lot of money in saying, I have more money or more people love me, so I build a bigger monument. By the way, a 40-acre cemetery, a 10-acre cemetery, let me get my numbers out, 10-acre cemetery has enough resource buried in it to build 40 houses, each with a swimming pool. We buried this amount of resource.
Right.
And if that's what you want, so be it. But what I want is, and what my advanced directive is, bury me very simply and in a shroud in a natural burial cemetery, keep the cost down, take the money you would have spent, have a party, and give the rest to charity.
Amen. Amen. No, I mean, my own values are very similar to yours. And I don't want anyone to feel obligated to drive 45 minutes to go park in the rain or something and put a stone on a headstone and then what? And no one will remember me X years from now. I want to, make it and then I'm gone.
Maybe I'm extreme. When Shelley and my wife and I were on trips overseas and say, if I happen to die here, you can leave me here.
Right.
Fly my corpse back. But that's, my unique perspective.
Right.
Cremation, by the way, is very big carbon footprint. It's a huge, like the equivalent of driving a car from here to Denver or Los Angeles. It takes a lot of fossil fuels to heat it up to 1900 degrees, plus you vaporize chemicals like mercury into the atmosphere. So,
well, before we talk about cremation or burial, let's pivot to organ donation.
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah, I'm a big supporter of organ donation, and in fact, my brother-in-law is a double lung transplant recipient. So, talk to me about that, if you would.
Well, we're totally on the same page again. I totally believe in it. In fact, I did legislation that revamped the entire Maryland organ donation program a few years ago and made it was fragmented in different segments. We now have one organized system. It made a huge difference. And I'll never forget the testimony about it, because there were people who testified on the fact that they were living like your brother because of organ donation, and others who testified that they lost a family member, but knowing that their organs were now helping somebody else live gave them a great deal of comfort. Yes. And that hearing, I mean, there was not a dry eye in the house. You could not help but be emotionally affected. Yep. I have a very good friend whose son was tragically killed, isolated head injury, and she donated everything, and it helped, like, I think 20, 30 people with one thing and another. Wow. And so I absolutely believe in organ donation. My personal directive says, take whatever can be used to help somebody else.
Ditto, mine too. And so.
No question about it.
Sorry?
No question about it.
Yeah. My first year in the Senate, I actually passed a modest organ donation bill, but one that required that information be put out in the register of wills and the clerk of the court and all that, because when you're making big life decisions about getting married or registering a will is the time that you should be thinking about organ donation. And so that seemed to make sense as a way of educating Marylanders. Our numbers are a lot lower than other states.
There's a bill right now that passed the Senate, Senate Bill 837, that hopefully will get a fair hearing and process in the House. It came out of the state's Quality Care End of Life Care Council and will promote advanced directive use. But there's some opposition from some of the big insurance companies, and hopefully we'll overcome that.
Talk to me about wills. Is that something that you work on very much, or is it more body focused and not property focused?
It's definitely more on the health side of wills, not property. But what happens actually is when people get to a certain point in life where they're starting to have a few assets, somebody says, well, complete a will, and they do the property and the children and all the other kinds of issues. But the advanced
charitable donations, don't just do the kids.
That's true. But the advanced directive gets shoved off to the side and not completed. So my focus has been on that piece. But thank you. I do remember that bill. I know I voted for it in the House. And yeah, any way you can get the word out. And it's especially good when people are at those moments where they're filling out legal papers in a setting. Why not complete the process?
That's right.
Common sense. Thank you.
Yes. One of my favorite questions to ask people, but it's a weird question, and so I don't ask it very often, but I'm going to ask you now. If you could know with absolute certainty and nothing you could do would change the outcome, would you want to know the date of your death?
Wow. Okay. I wasn't expecting that one. No.
No. Okay. Okay. So almost everybody is a no. I thought you might be a yes. I'm a yes, because I always say I would live very differently if I knew I had 2 months versus 30 years, in terms of spending and travel and everything. I don't know. So, okay. All right. Talk to me about religion and spirituality in terms of the issues and in terms of your book. How controversial and how much overlay, consensus can you reach among different faith communities?
Actually, my personal belief system comes out of the Jewish tradition, but I'm really very secular and diverse, draw from a lot of different learnings, and my own just thoughts and experiences actually is what guides my spiritual life to the extent that I'm involved in that. But in the book, it was really fun to do the research on that. And every culture has its rituals, and I think rituals have some value, especially at times of mourning. And whatever you choose to do is fine. But it's good to acknowledge life's passages.
Yes.
And there were different terms that I came across that were interesting. Like in one of the American Indian cultures, they say the person walked on. I remember reading obituaries in the newspaper and said so and so walked on, which is or went through the passing curtain and walked on, as opposed to some of the other terms. It gave a different flavor to that. There's also an African culture in which there's two kinds of memories of people who died. There's the people who are still alive and actually knew the person who died. And then there's a second set of memories of people who didn't know them but remember them anyways. It might be like a great-great-grandparent you never knew, but they're still in your lineage and heritage. So there's all sorts of interesting ways that people look at this. You can get carried away about some of the monuments with this. They've built the pyramids of Egypt and other humongous monuments to death, which I don't like.
Right.
But I think that it's good to reflect on these things, and it gives you more sense of the value of the daily life you're in, the daily moments you're in now.
Yes. I've always found it fascinating, the rest in peace, which is what I grew up hearing, versus rest in power, which is often used in the African-American community. And I find really uplifting as a concept too.
I think whatever works for individual people, as long as it's not harming others, is okay with me. I tend to be more private about my belief systems in that regard. But in the book, we give a certain, a lot of space to those kinds of approaches. The
Right.
diversity of approaches on all of this is really valuable. We can learn from each other.
So Dan, I want to get ready to wrap up and go to our fast five, but let me just talk to you about being an author in the time of the pandemic. How are you getting out? How are you selling your book? How are people hearing about it? Because you can't do book signings.
It's harder than it was the first time. The second book, though, is much better, more complete, more
Mhm,
detailed, a little bit more of me in there as well, and me and
mhm.
Shelley in there as well. So it's a challenge, but I'm doing a fair number of Zoom presentations to all kinds of groups. Last week, I spoke to the National Medical Association, which is in effect the Black Physician AMA, at
Yeah.
their wellness colloquium about African American health. I did a book club in Los Angeles and a conference in Colorado. So I'll be talking to Maryland State teachers, retired teachers later next month. So I'm all over wherever I can go. I was in Texas, actually went to Texas to do a talk there, which
Mm.
was kind of a unique experience. And they just come out of their deep freeze. So I heard some interesting stories about that. So I
Yes,
bring this up wherever I can and hope people will think seriously and get the book and find it of value.
that's wonderful. Well, thank you again for the book and for your leadership on these issues because they're fundamentally important. And again, we can't avoid them, so we might as well talk about it and plan for our end of life.
If you don't plan, all kinds of chaos and problems can ensue. Planning doesn't guarantee, but it shifts the likelihood greatly to respect your values and wishes, whatever they may be. That's a good
Yes,
thing. And it
yes.
also relieves a lot of stress on the people around you if they know what
Mm-hmm.
you want.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Well, Dan Morhaim, my fast five for you. Five quick questions to let people get to know you a little bit better.
Okay.
First, what's the best advice you've ever received?
I think I'll do more recent advice.
Okay.
Move to a plant-based diet and exercise regularly. And that's really made a big difference for me in the last few years. I'm in as good shape as I've been in a long time. I run several miles several days a week and longer runs 7 miles on weekends. And so I think taking care of my own body, I've been good about it and not good about it over my lifespan of my lifetime. Got pretty fat at one point. And so I think take good care of your body.
Good for you. Okay, question number two. What's the most favorite place you've ever traveled?
I've been fortunate to travel many great places, but I think my most favorite is the redwood forests of Northern California. I'm from California. I've had a lot of opportunity to be in those magnificent, huge, majestic trees that are thousands of years old, and to stand in a grove of redwood trees. It's just a wonderful experience.
And
So
that's your
I
backdrop
would say
right
that.
now, right?
It's a Canadian Rockies, but it's close enough. Yeah.
Okay, okay. What's your favorite movie of all time?
Casablanca, I think, would be one that I could watch over and over again because it has so many different aspects of trying to do the right thing, even when it's hard to do, and sacrifice, and also to see your own problems in the larger as we live them as they're so important, but in the big picture, they're bigger things going on, and it's just
Mm,
so beautifully written and acted and constructed.
nice. Speaking of movies, if there were a movie being made about you, who would you want to be cast as Dan Morhaim?
Hmm. Well, I have a fantasy, but I think probably George Clooney would be nice, but I'll take Russell Crowe.
There you go. Both are good choices. And the last question, Dan, the one that I ask everyone, is what is your hidden secret superpower? What is something you're really good at that most folks can't do?
Uh, I think take action steps, and sometimes, most of the time, that's worked for me, and sometimes even to this day, it gets me in trouble. But I find that I'm very good at initiating projects and seeing them through, and sparking things, and going and doing things that are initiatives and bold, and often put people off at the beginning, but they come around to them later. Reminds me of one of my other favorite bills, the bill that allowed dogs in outdoor areas of
Mhm.
restaurants.
There you go.
One of my favorites, and that was a real wild ride, as you could imagine, in the General Assembly. But I like pushing the envelope
It
as
was,
much as
it
possible.
was, it was rough to pass.
Yes, yes.
I'm
Actually,
sorry.
my wonderful legislative staff person, Michelle Bernstein, we're trying to think of the name of the bill. She called it the Dining Out Growth Act,
There you go.
DOG, and it
There
slipped
you
by
go.
everybody's attention, but it actually made for a huge boost in outdoor dining throughout the state
Perfect.
and pet-friendly travel. So it was actually the Department of Economic Development supported the bill, and that helped. But
Yeah.
it's pushing the envelope, I think, is the thing that I like to do. And there's always backwash, backslap for that. But
Yes.
I still continue to be fearless about doing
Good for
those
you.
things as much as I can.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dan Morhaim, former delegate, author, for all that you've done in your career. May you continue to push the envelope and take actions and initiate good projects. And thanks for being an important advocate on the issues around death and dying. We need more conversations around that. So stay safe and well, and thanks for kibitzing with me today.
What an honor. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Thank you. Take care.